All right, let's talk a little bit about legal responsibilities and the important aspects of this. As you can see here, there are several different things that you need to be aware of: duty to act, standard of care, scope of practice, abandonment, negligence, assault, and battery. Those are the most common ones that we run across. There are others, but these are the ones that are probably the most common things to cover. First and foremost, duty to act. That is a legal obligation for you to take care and provide patient care when you are on duty. This comes into play when you are on duty, not necessarily when you are off duty, when you're not working, when you're driving along. If you see an accident happen, there's nothing says you have a duty to act. You do not have to stop. If you feel like you should, if you want to stop and it's safe for you to stop, you are welcome to do that. There are things called the Good Samaritan laws. We talk about those a little bit later on, but that's what the Good Samaritan law is there for. It will protect you for stopping to provide care. But the duty to act is, for example, if you get dispatched to a call, you now have a duty to act and to respond to that patient. If you do not, then you have violated that duty, and then we can get into abandonment or negligence or something like that. So, duty to act. Standard of care is pretty simple. It is the level of care that an EMT at that point in time would provide based on local protocols, evidence-based medicine. What is the standard of care? For example, somebody who is short of breath and their pulse oximetry is below 90%, the standard of care is to provide that patient with oxygen. The levels of oxygen and stuff based on local protocols, those kind of things, but the standard of care for that patient is to provide oxygen. If you don't provide oxygen for without a really valid reason, then you have violated the standard of care. You're not following the standard of care. So that's what standard of care is. Not to be confused with the scope of practice. Scope of practice means the things that you can do, the procedures that you're allowed to do. Let's talk about airway, for example. The scope of practice for an EMT, when we talk about airway, is basic airway maneuvers, and it also involves some advanced airway maneuvers, such as blind insertion airway devices. That's where the scope of practice stops for an EMT. That's as high as an EMT can perform. An advanced EMT or a paramedic can do additional levels of airway care that is within their scope of practice. So a paramedic's scope of practice includes the scope of practice of an EMT, but it goes beyond that. So as an EMT, your scope of practice is the basic level and whatever advanced level stuff that you are allowed to do, and that's based on your protocols, based on state rules and licenses and those kind of things. So that's what scope of practice is. Abandonment is a fairly simple term to prove, or abandonment is basically when you don't provide the standard care for the patient, if you don't continue the standard of care for the patient. If you start caring for a patient and without good reason, the patient hasn't refused for you to treat them or any of that stuff, and you walk away from the patient without handing them over to somebody of equal or higher qualifications, then you have abandoned that patient. Which is why once you've made patient contact, you are by that patient, you stay by that patient until you can turn them over to another EMT, somebody of higher certification. So that's where abandonment comes in. If for any reason you don't turn that patient over to somebody of equal or higher certification and something happens to the patient, they can consider that abandonment and then bring charges. So that's ultimately what we're looking for. Just ultimately, when you make patient contact, you maintain patient contact, stay by the patient's side the entire time. Somebody needs to stay there, and then you turn the patient over to somebody of equal or higher care. Now, this is the caveat. It's equal or higher care of what the patient requires. So, for example, a paramedic can turn a patient over to an EMT basic if the patient's presentation is only EMT basic level. If that's all the care that the patient needs, then that's not considered abandonment for the paramedic to turn the patient over to an EMT to transport or take care of them. Same thing for an EMT. If the patient doesn't need EMT level care, if all they need is somebody to just sit by them and watch them, and that can be done by a nurse or a nurse's aide or somebody like that, then you are welcome to do that, and at that point it does not constitute abandonment. But if a paramedic has a patient that they've started an IV on, they've done cardiac stuff with them, they cannot turn that patient over to anybody other than another paramedic or somebody higher than that. That becomes abandonment. Negligence is the failure to provide the standard of care, and damages have resulted from that. So with negligence, there are several things, and the first two at the top of this list come into play. Duty to act. So to prove negligence, you have to prove that there was a duty to act. You have to prove that the provider breached that duty, and then you have to prove that there were damages to the patient based on the breach of duty. So, for example, if an EMT is dispatched to a motor vehicle accident and they do not respond to the accident and something happens negatively to the patient, they end up dying or they end up with brain damage or something like that, then that is a pretty clear-cut case of negligence. There was a duty to act. When you were dispatched, you got the duty to act. You breached the duty because you did not respond, and then the patient had damages resulting, which would be the brain damage, resulted from you not responding. So what they're saying is, if you would have responded, odds are that patient would not have had brain damage. So that's just one example of negligence. So that's something that you will see, you'll get tested on. So understand that negligence requires three things that you have to prove. You have to prove that there was a duty to act, the EMT or whomever, the provider, breached that duty, and then that damages resulted because of that breach of duty. So that is negligence. The final two are simple. You've heard them before. You hear it all the time: assault and battery. Assault is used improperly a lot of times. If somebody is physically touched, it is no longer assault, it is battery. Physically touching a patient becomes battery. Assault is to put the person, and I said patient, anybody. The battery becomes when you touch somebody without them wanting you to touch them. Remember the things we talked about earlier, implied consent, those kind of things. If they're unconscious, it's implied that it's okay for you to do that. You don't have to worry about assault and battery in those cases. But if the patient is conscious and can communicate with you, you need their permission to lay hands on them. Even if you're just touching them, anything, you need their permission. They need to agree that it is okay for you to assess them. So that is battery. Assault is to put the person in fear of bodily harm or damage. So it is simply a threat. It can be an aggressive posture. It can be, words, whatever it is that puts that person in fear of you doing harm to them physically in some way, shape, or form. That is called assault. Battery is when your hands touch the person. So again, more times than not, assault is used for a paramedic to be. We'll talk about it, EMTs, paramedics, whatever. The patient may assault the EMS crew by punching them or something like that. The assault happened when they began to direct the whatever violence towards them. That is the assault. When they touched the person, that becomes battery. So easy way to remember that, you have to hit a ball with a bat. Battery. You have to touch the patient in order to be considered battery. So something as simple as just grabbing them by the wrist and saying, come on, considered battery if you don't have permission for that. So that's legal responsibilities.